He looks exactly like me, GRM. Did you really think you could hide a bae in a place that smells like old grease and desperation? Don't. We're leaving. Now. Me reclaiming my property, finally. He tossed the photo album onto the sticky diner table while his men blocked the entrance, looking like shadows that had finally caught up to me. That's the moment I need you to understand first. Not because it was the day I lost my son, but because it was the day I realized I never actually had him. 3 months before he walked into that diner, a regular customer I barely noticed had left a tip that should have sent me running. I just hadn't looked at the back of the receipt yet. I was standing by the industrial toaster when the door opened. That's the detail that stuck. Not the way the humid air turned to ice. Not the way the grease-slicked floor seemed to settle. Not the way my regulars went unnaturally still, like prey sensing a wolf. It was the toaster. It burned the sourdough I was prepping for table 4. I'd worked a 12-hour shift. My uniform was damp with sweat. My hair was escaping my tie, and my feet had been screaming for the last 3 hours. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was trying to scrape together enough tips to buy Leo new shoes. Then the door opened. Hey besties. Welcome back to the channel. If you're ready to see a corporate bully get what's coming to him, hit that subscribe button. Let us know where you're watching from. Is it morning or night for you? Now, let's get back to the takedown. Bae Jianwoo walked in wearing a suit that cost more than I'd earn in 3 lifetimes, holding a manila envelope, his presence a vacuum that sucked the oxygen out of the room. His face was different, calm in a way I'd never seen. Not peaceful. Predatory. He didn't come alone. Behind him, leaning against the door frame like he owned the city because, technically, he did, was his lead enforcer. 6 years of hidden addresses and fake names. 6 years of jumping at every black car that drove too slowly past our apartment. 6 years of telling myself the most powerful man in Seoul had forgotten a waitress. He was standing between me and the exit. My brain tried to build an escape route, found nothing. We need to do this now, Jianwoo said, flat, clean, the way you'd order a hit. He slid the envelope across the laminate table. I looked down. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a birth certificate with his name already typed into the father's slot. I didn't touch it. Jianwoo. My voice came out shakier than I expected. What is this? He crossed his arms. Me being honest finally. That hit harder than any threat. He just stood there, expensive watch, tailored silk, the same expression he wore when he was about to dismantle a rival syndicate. I can't let you keep doing this, he said. You work constantly, and you're still failing. You come home smelling like dishwater, talking about making ends meet, like it's a victory. He exhaled. This isn't a life for my son, GRM. The way he said my name sounded like a cage door clicking shut. I've been trying, I said. I know. He glanced back at his men. That's exactly the problem. This is your best. And it isn't enough. And just like that, every random inspection at my apartment, every anonymous tip that kept me from getting a better job, every time I felt watched and told myself I was crazy, it all clicked into one terrifying picture. The silence in the diner felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I stared at the photo on the table. It was Leo. He was wearing his favorite blue hoodie, laughing as he chased a pigeon in the park. It wasn't a photo I had taken. It was a shot from a distance, clear and sharp. It was the kind of photo a hunter takes of his prize. My hands began to shake, so I gripped the edge of a laminate table until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, to grab the picture and run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. Jianwoo didn't look at me with anger. He didn't pull out a weapon or raise his voice. Instead, he picked up a fork and traced the pattern on the tabletop. He looked bored, like this was just another business meeting, and that was the most terrifying part. He had a smirk on his face, the kind of look someone gives when they already know every move you're going to make. He finally looked up, his dark eyes locking onto mine, and the air in the room seemed to vanish. He has a big appetite for a 5-year-old, Jianwoo said. His voice was smooth, like expensive silk, but it sent a cold shiver down my spine. I've been watching him for a while now. He seems to enjoy the breakfast shift here. Tell me, Jerem, how's my son like his eggs? Is he a fan of scrambled? Or does he prefer them sunny side up like I do? The question was so normal, so domestic, that it made my stomach flip. He was talking about my son, the boy I had bathed, tucked in, and protected for years, as if he were a piece of lost luggage he had finally found. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. I felt the eyes of the suited men at the door watching me. They weren't moving. They were just waiting for a signal. "You have no right to ask that," I finally whispered. My voice sounded thin and weak in the large, quiet room. "You don't know him. You weren't there. You chose your life and soul, and I chose to give him a real one." Jian-Woo leaned forward, his shadow falling over the table and covering the photo of Leo. The smirk didn't leave his face, but his eyes turned as hard as flint. He didn't look like the man I had loved anymore. He looked like a king who had come to collect a debt. He reached out and touched the edge of my apron, his fingers brushing against the fabric I had spent all morning staining with grease. "I didn't choose to be left in the dark, Jaram," he said softly, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You stole 6 years of my legacy. You hid the heir to the Bay family in a place that smells like old frying oil and broken dreams. Did you really think a few miles and a fake name would be enough to keep what is mine away from me?" I recoiled from his touch, my back hitting the counter behind me. The bells on the door jingled again as one of his men stepped inside and flipped the open sign to closed. He locked the deadbolt with a loud click that echoed through the diner. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked toward the back exit, thinking of the heavy steel door in the kitchen, but I knew his men were already there. They were everywhere. Jian-Woo stood up slowly. He was tall, and in his expensive suit, he looked completely out of place against the peeling wallpaper and the flickering neon signs of the diner. He didn't look like a customer anymore. He looked like the owner. He looked like the man who had just decided that my time as a free woman was over. "The eggs, Jaram," he reminded me, his tone almost playful now, though his eyes remained cold. "Answer the question. We have a long drive ahead of us, and I want to make sure the chef at the estate has everything ready for his first meal at home." "He isn't going anywhere with you," I snapped, a spark of maternal rage finally breaking through my fear. "I'll call the police. I'll tell them who you are." Jian-Woo actually laughed then. It was a short, dry sound that had no joy in it. He gestured to the window, where a black sedan sat idling at the curb. The police station was only 2 blocks away, but I realized then that it didn't matter. The officers, the mayor, the people who owned the very ground I stood on, they all answered to someone. And that someone was currently standing in my diner, waiting for me to give up. "The police won't be coming, GRM," he said, stepping closer until I could smell the expensive, woody scent of his cologne. It was a smell that belonged in high-rise offices and luxury cars, not here. "In fact, the police are the ones who helped me find your emergency bank account. The one you thought I didn't know about. The one that is currently frozen." My blood turned to ice. Every safety net I had built, every dollar I had hidden away for a rainy day was gone. He hadn't just found me. He had dismantled my entire existence before he even stepped through the door. I looked at the photo of Leo again. He looked so happy and so unaware of the storm that had just arrived. Jian-Woo reached down and picked up the photo, sliding it into his breast pocket, right over his heart. "You've done a decent job keeping him fed, I suppose," he said, his voice returning to that terrifyingly calm level. "But your shift is over. You don't belong behind a counter anymore, and my son doesn't belong in a daycare center that charges by the hour." He turned toward the door, not even looking back to see if I was following. He knew I would. He knew that as long as he had the power to reach out and touch Leo's life, I would walk into any fire he built for me. I looked around the diner one last time, the place where I had worked so hard to be nobody. It was all over. The quiet life was dead. "Wait," I called out, my voice trembling. Jian-Woo stopped with his hand on the door handle. He looked back over his shoulder, the light from the street catching the sharp line of his jaw. He waited, his expression unreadable. "How did you find us?" I asked. I was so careful. Jian-Woo gave a small, chilling smile. It was the look of a man who had been playing a game of chess while I was playing tag. "I never lost you, GRM. I just waited until he was old enough to understand who his father is. Now, let's go. Our son is waiting, and I don't like to be late. I followed him out into the gray morning air, the heavy scent of rain mixing with the exhaust of the idling cars. As the door of the black sedan opened for me, I realized that the choice he was giving me wasn't a choice at all. It was a sentence. I wasn't a waitress anymore, and I wasn't a woman on the run. I was a passenger in a life that Jian-woo had already decided for me. The diner, the cheap shoes, and the freedom of being invisible were gone, replaced by the heavy, suffocating weight of his protection. The drive from the diner felt like a blur. Jian-woo had let me go pick up Leo from school, but he didn't do it because he was kind. He did it because he knew I had nowhere to run. His black cars followed me the whole way, sitting like silent shadows in my rearview mirror. I didn't care. As soon as I saw Leo running out of the school gates with his messy hair and bright smile, my only thought was escape. I didn't tell him why we were rushing. I just told him we were going on a surprise trip. We stopped at my small apartment for only 5 minutes. My heart was thumping against my ribs, so hard it hurt. I grabbed the emergency bag I had kept hidden at the bottom of the closet for years. It had our extra clothes, some cash I'd managed to hide in an old book, and our fake birth certificates. I threw it into my old, beat-up car and buckled Leo into a seat. He looked confused, holding his favorite stuffed bear, but I just kissed his forehead and told him to stay quiet. I didn't take the main streets. I drove through back alleys and side roads, trying to lose the black sedans. For a moment, when I turned onto the highway that led out of the state, I thought I had made it. The road was open, and the city was disappearing behind us. I pushed the gas pedal down as far as it would go. Just a few more miles, I whispered to myself. Just cross the bridge and we can vanish. But Jian-woo didn't play by the rules. A few miles down the road, bright blue and red lights began to flash behind me. 2 police cars sped up, their sirens screaming. My stomach dropped. I hadn't done anything wrong, but in this town, that didn't matter. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Leo started to cry, the loud noise scaring him. "It's okay, baby." I lied, my voice cracking. "It's just a routine check." The officers didn't walk up to my window to ask for my license. They didn't even look at me. One of them simply opened my back door and started moving Leo's seat into the back of a luxury SUV that had pulled up behind them. "Stop. What are you doing?" I screamed, jumping out of the car. One of the officers put a firm hand on my shoulder. He wasn't mean, but his grip was like iron. "Mr. Bay is waiting, Miss Jean. This car isn't safe for the young master. Please get into the SUV." "I'm calling the real police," I yelled, reaching for my phone. The man just looked at me with a sad kind of pity. "We are the only police you need to worry about today." They didn't take us to a police station. They didn't take us to a jail. Instead, the SUV drove for an hour, heading deep into the hills where the trees were thick and the fences were high. We pulled up to a massive set of iron gates that looked like they belonged to a fortress. There were cameras everywhere, and men with earpieces stood guard at every corner. As the gates groaned open, I realized my mistake. I thought I could outrun a man who owned the very road I was driving on. The SUV rolled up a long, winding driveway lined with perfect white roses. At the top of the hill sat a house that looked more like a palace than a home. It was beautiful, but to me, it looked like the end of the world. The door opened, and there stood Jian-woo. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore, and his sleeves were rolled up. He looked relaxed, standing on the marble steps like he had been waiting for us to arrive for tea. He walked down to the car and opened my door. "You're late, JRM," he said, his voice as calm as a summer lake. He reached into the back and unbuckled Leo, lifting the sleepy boy into his arms. Leo didn't fight him. He just blinked, confused by the giant house and the strange man who smelled like expensive wood. Jian-woo looked at me, his eyes sharp and triumphant. "I told you the highway wasn't the way out. This is the only way forward now." I looked back at the iron gates as they clicked shut behind us. I had tried to fly, but I had only succeeded in landing exactly where he wanted me. We weren't in a cell, but as I looked at the high walls and the silent guards, I knew we weren't free either. This was Jianwu's world, and now it was ours too. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the silence. It wasn't the normal silence of my old apartment, where you could hear the hum of the fridge or the distant sound of a neighbor's TV. This was a heavy, expensive silence that felt like it was wrapping me in cotton. I was lying on a bed so soft it felt like a cloud, covered in silk sheets that stayed cool against my skin. The ceiling was high and decorated with gold paint that caught the morning light. I sat up fast, my heart racing as I remembered the iron gates and the black SUV.
Lao.
I called out, my voice sounding small in the giant room. The door to the room clicked open instantly. 2 women walked in. They wore matching gray uniforms with crisp white aprons. They didn't say a word. They didn't even look me in the eye. They just bowed low and began to move around the room. One started drawing a bath in the attached bathroom, while the other began to lay out a set of clothes on a velvet chair. "Where is my son?" I demanded, sliding out of the bed. My feet sank into a rug that was thicker than any blanket I had ever owned. The woman nearest to me bowed again. "The young master is having breakfast with Mr. Bay in the sunroom," she said. Her voice was very low and very polite. "He is safe. He is happy. You are to join them once you have prepared for the day." I rushed toward the door, but before I could reach the handle, the other woman moved with surprising speed. She didn't grab me, but she stood firmly in my path, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She looked like a statue. "Please, Ms. Jean," she said softly. "Mr. Bay prefers that you dress first. The halls are cold this morning." It was a polite excuse, but I knew what it really meant. I wasn't allowed to leave this room looking like a waitress. I wasn't allowed to leave at all until they decided I was ready. I looked around the room. It was beautiful. There were fresh lilies in a crystal vase and a balcony that looked out over a sparkling blue pool. But when I tried the handle to the balcony, it was locked. When I looked at the windows, the glass was thick and unbreakable. The women, the maids, treated me like I was a queen. They brought me a tray of fresh fruit and tea that smelled like jasmine. They held out a dress made of soft cream wool that probably cost more than I had made in 10 years of working double shifts at the diner. They brushed my hair until it shone, their movements careful and practiced. But every time I moved toward the main door, one of them was there. They were like silent shadows. They didn't use force and they didn't use mean words. They just used their bodies to block my way, always bowing, always staying perfectly polite. It was the most frustrating feeling in the world. I wanted to scream at them, to push past them, but they acted like they were only there to serve me. "Let me through," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I want to see my son right now." "Of course, Ms. Jean," the taller maid replied, gesturing toward the vanity mirror. "As soon as you are finished. Mr. Bay is very excited to see you." I realized then that Jianwu had thought of everything. He hadn't put me in a basement or behind bars. He had put me in a room filled with gold and silk. He had given me servants who treated me with respect. But as I looked at the 2 women standing by the door, I knew the truth. They weren't there to help me. They were there to make sure I stayed exactly where Jianwu wanted me. I finally put on the cream dress. It fit perfectly, which made me feel even more sick. It meant he knew my size. It meant he had been planning this for a long time. I sat on the edge of the velvet chair while they finished my hair. "Is the door always locked?" I asked, looking at the heavy oak entrance. The maids didn't answer. They simply bowed one last time and opened the door for me. But as I stepped out into the hallway, I saw 2 men in dark suits standing just a few feet away. They didn't look at me, but I knew they were counting my steps. I walked down the long, marble hallway, my heels clicking loudly on the stone. The house was full of sunlight and beautiful art, but it felt cold. Every door I passed was closed. Every window I looked through showed the high stone walls that surrounded the estate. I had been a waitress for years, serving people and taking orders. I knew what it felt like to be at the bottom. But standing in this palace, surrounded by people who called me Ms. Jean and bowed to me, I felt smaller than I ever had at the diner. Back there, I had been tired and poor, but I had been free. Here I was a prize in a display case. As I reached the glass doors of the sunroom, I saw them. Jian Wu was sitting at a long table, reading a newspaper. Leo was sitting next to him, his face covered in chocolate from a pastry. He was laughing at something Jian Wu had said. My heart broke into a million pieces. Jian Wu looked up and smiled at me. It wasn't a mean smile. It was the smile of a man who had finally put the last piece of a puzzle into place. You look lovely, JRM, he said, standing up to pull out a chair for me. I hope the room was to your liking. I chose the colors myself. I sat down, my body stiff. I reached over and grabbed Leo's hand, holding it tight. He looked at me, his eyes bright. Mom, look at this house. It's like a castle. It is a castle, Leo, Jian Wu said, his eyes never leaving mine. And castles are built to keep the people inside safe. He didn't say the word prisoner, but as I looked at the silent maids standing in the corners of the room, I didn't need him to. I was in a golden prison, and the man who held the keys was currently pouring me a cup of tea. The day dragged on like a slow, heavy dream. I spent most of it in the gardens with Leo, but we weren't alone. Everywhere we went, two suited men followed a few paces behind. When Leo ran, they walked faster. When we sat by the fountain, they stood like stone pillars under the shade of the trees. I tried to make it a game for Leo, but my heart wasn't in it. Every time I looked up at the high stone walls, I felt the walls of the castle closing in. As the sun began to set, the taller maid appeared again. She told me it was time for dinner. She led me to a dining room that was even grander than the sunroom. The walls were lined with dark wood, and a crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, making the room glow like it was filled with diamonds. A long table sat in the center, but there were only two places set. Where's Leo? I asked, my voice echoing. The young master has already eaten and is watching a movie in the theater room, Jian Wu said. He walked out of the shadows at the far end of the room. He had changed into a dark sweater and slacks, looking relaxed and dangerous. He pulled out my chair, and this time I sat down without a fight. I was too tired to argue. In the center of the table, resting between the silver plates and the tall candles, was a thick, black leather book. It looked old and heavy. Jian Wu didn't say anything at first. He waited for the maids to serve the soup and disappear back into the kitchen. Then he reached out and pushed the book toward me. Go on, he said softly. Open it. I hesitated. My fingers trembled as I touched the cold leather. I flipped open the first page, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a photo of Leo as a baby. He was only a few days old, wrapped in the yellow blanket I had used when we left the hospital in the middle of the night. I thought I was alone that night, I whispered, my eyes filling with tears. You are never alone, JRM, Jian Wu replied. He took a sip of his wine, his eyes watching me over the rim of the glass. I turned the pages, and my heart began to break. There was a photo of Leo's first birthday. We had been living in a tiny basement apartment then. The picture showed me holding a single cupcake with one candle, but the camera angle was from outside the window, peeking through the glass. There was a photo of Leo's first steps in a dusty park. There was even a photo of the time he fell and cut his knee on the sidewalk 3 years ago. I remembered that day perfectly. I had been so scared because the cut was deep, and I didn't have enough money for a doctor. In the photo, a black car was parked in the background. I realized now that the car had been there to make sure we were okay. You were there, I said, looking up at him. Anger began to burn through my sadness. You watched us struggle. You watched me cry when I couldn't pay the rent. You watched me work 3 jobs just to buy him milk. If you cared so much, why didn't you help us then? Jian Wu leaned forward, the candlelight dancing in his dark eyes. I did help you. Who do you think paid the landlord to keep the heat on during that first winter? Who do you think made sure the diner hired you the day you walked in off the street? I didn't just watch, JRM. I managed your life. I kept the monsters away so you could raise him in peace. You are the monster, I shouted, slamming the book shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. You let me live in fear for 6 years. You let me think I was running for my life. You were running, he said, his voice as calm as a frozen pond. But you were running inside a circle I built for you. I was waiting, JRM. A boy needs his mother when he is small. But a bay needs his father when he starts to become a man. I waited until he was old enough to remember me. I waited until the right time to strike, so that he would never want to leave. He stood up and walked around the table, stopping right behind my chair. He leaned down, his breath warm against my ear. It was a gesture that used to make me feel safe, but now it made me feel like I was being hunted. "Look at the last page," he whispered. I opened the book again, and turned to the very back. It wasn't an old photo. It was a picture of me and Leo from that morning, sitting in the gardens of this estate. We were surrounded by the white roses and the high walls. "The story in the diner is over," Jianwu said. He put his hand over mine, pinning it to the leather book. "The story of our family starts here. Every birthday, every scraped knee, and every memory from now on will happen under my roof. You had your 6 years. Now, the rest belong to me." I looked at the photos of my son's life. A life I thought was mine alone. I realized then that Jianwu hadn't just found us yesterday. He had been the ghost in our hallway and the shadow on our street for half a decade. He had let me keep my secret only because he enjoyed the power of knowing it. I wasn't just a mother raising a child. I was a caretaker looking after his property until he was ready to claim it. I pushed the book away, but I couldn't push away the truth. He had been there all along, and now that he had stepped out of the shadows, there was no place left for us to hide. The morning air felt thin and sharp as I stood on the balcony. I watched the guards patrol the perimeter. They moved like machines, their eyes always scanning the grounds. I knew I couldn't climb the walls, and I knew the gates wouldn't open for me. My only hope was to find a way to talk to the outside world. I needed a phone, or a message, or someone who wasn't under Jianwu's spell. I walked back inside, and found one of the younger guards standing near the grand staircase. He looked less like a statue than the others. His name tag said Minho. I took a deep breath and reached into the hidden pocket of my cream dress. I had kept a gold watch that had belonged to my father. It was the only thing of value I had left that Jianwu hadn't provided. "Minho," I whispered, glancing around to make sure the maids weren't watching. "I need help. Just one phone call. If you let me use your mobile, this is yours." I opened my hand to show him the watch. The gold face sparkled in the sunlight. The young man looked at the watch, then back at me. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of greed in his eyes. But then his face went completely blank. He didn't reach for the watch. Instead, he looked over my shoulder and stood even straighter. "Mr. Bay provides everything we need, Ms. Jean," he said, his voice loud and clear. "I have no use for a watch. Please return to your room." I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around to see Jianwu standing there. He was holding a glass of water, looking perfectly relaxed. He didn't look angry that I had tried to bribe his staff. He looked amused. "The watch is a nice piece, GRM," he said, taking a sip of water. "But Minho knows that his salary, his health insurance, and even his mother's surgery were paid for by me. He isn't going to risk his life for a piece of gold." Jianwu gestured for me to follow him into his private study. The room was filled with books and monitors showing every corner of the estate. He sat behind a massive desk and opened a file folder. "You keep looking for an exit," Jianwu said. "You think about your old life. You think about your mother's house in the countryside, don't you? The one with the leaky roof and the debt that was supposed to take the land away last month." My heart stopped. My mother still lived in that house. She was old and sickly, and I had been sending her half of my tips every week just to keep the bank away. "What did you do?" I gasped. Jianwu turned a computer screen toward me. It showed a legal document. "I didn't do anything bad, GM. I paid off the mortgage in full. I hired a contractor to fix the roof and a nurse to check on her every day. She is very happy. She thinks you found a wonderful job in the city that pays very well." "You bought her," I whispered, my eyes stinging. "I secured her," he corrected, "and I bought the house. It is now part of the Bay family holdings. If you were to run there, you would simply be walking back into another one of my properties. There is no home to go back to that doesn't belong to me." He pulled out another piece of paper. It was a list of every person I had known in the last 6 years. My landlord, the owner of the diner, even the librarian who used to let Leo stay late. Next to every name was a number, the amount Jianwu had paid to ensure their loyalty or their silence. I have erased the path behind you, Jianwu said. He stood up and walked over to me, taking the gold watch from my hand. He set it on the desk like it was a toy. There are no friends waiting for you. There are no debts left to pay. Every bridge you think you can cross has already been burned. You aren't a waitress on the run anymore because that waitress doesn't exist in the records anymore. I looked at him and realized the true scale of my prison. It wasn't just the stone walls or the guards. It was the fact that he had woven himself into every part of my life. He had taken my past and my family and turned them into parts of his empire. Why go to all this trouble? I asked, my voice cracking. Why not just take Leo and let me go? Jianwu reached out and tucked his stray hair behind my ear. His touch was soft, but his eyes were like iron. Because Leo needs a mother who stays. And I have spent 6 years watching you through cameras and car windows, Jiaram. I decided a long time ago that I wasn't just bringing my son home. I was bringing the woman who was brave enough to run for me back to where she belongs. He walked to the door and opened it for me. Go play with Leo, Jiaram. The gardens are beautiful today, and you have nowhere else to be. I walked out of the study, feeling like a ghost. I looked at my hands, the hands that had scrubbed floors and carried heavy trays to stay free. Now, they were clean and soft, but they were empty. I had tried to find a way out, but Jianwu had shown me the truth. There was no out left in the world. Every road led back to him. Every door was his door. I was trapped in a world where even my own memories were being managed by the man who held the keys. The afternoon was heavy and still. I was sitting on a stone bench near the edge of the rose garden, watching Leo play with a small wooden airplane. For a moment, it almost felt like a normal day, if I ignored the men standing at the corners of the house. But the peace didn't last. A loud noise, like a distant thunderclap, broke the silence. It was followed by the screech of tires near the outer perimeter. Before I could stand up, a black van crashed through the side hedge, tearing through the beautiful white flowers. 4 men jumped out. They didn't wear the neat, dark suits of Jianwu's guards. They looked messy and desperate, holding heavy metal pipes and short, jagged blades. One of them pointed at me and yelled something I couldn't understand. Leo, come here. I screamed. I scooped him up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned to run toward the house, but one of the men was faster. He blocked my path, his face twisted into an ugly grin. The Great Bay Jianwu has a weakness after all, the man hissed. He reached out a dirty hand to grab my arm. You're going to help us settle a debt, lady. I pulled back, clutching Leo so tight he started to cry. Just as the man's fingers brushed my sleeve, a shadow fell over us. It wasn't a guard. It was Jianwu. He didn't run. He walked. But there was something about the way he moved that made the air feel cold. He wasn't the calm man who had poured me tea this morning. He looked like something ancient and dangerous. He didn't say a word. He stepped between me and the attacker, and in one swift movement, he grabbed the man's wrist. There was a sickening crack. The man screamed and dropped his blade. Jianwu didn't stop. He moved like a blur of dark ink. He kicked the second man in the chest, sending him flying back into the van. The other 2 attackers froze, their eyes wide with terror. They realized too late that they hadn't broken into a home. They had stepped into a tiger's den. You thought you could touch what is mine? Jianwu's voice was low, vibrating with a rage that made my hair stand on end. He didn't sound human. Jianwu's enforcers appeared from the shadows, surrounding the van. But Jianwu waved them back. He wanted these men to see him. He picked up the jagged blade from the grass and looked at it. Then he looked at the man whose wrist he had broken. Please, the man begged, crawling backward on the grass. We were just told you cared about the girl. We didn't know. That is the problem, Jianwu said. He didn't raise his voice, but the coldness in it was more terrifying than a shout. You knew I cared, and you still thought you would live to tell the story. What happened next was fast and brutal. Jianwu didn't show any mercy. He moved with a cold, calculated violence that I had only seen in movies. He dismantled them one by one, Not because he had to, but because he wanted to send a message. I covered Leo's eyes, burying his face in my shoulder, but I couldn't block out the sounds. The thuds, the groans, and the sound of Jian Wu's heavy boots on the gravel. When it was over, the four men were slumped on the ground, barely moving. Jian Wu stood in the middle of the ruined roses, his chest barely heaving. There was a small splash of red on his white shirt, but his face was perfectly calm again. He dropped the blade into the dirt and turned toward me. I backed away, my legs trembling. This was the man who had tucked Leo into bed last night. This was the man who had bought my mother's house. I saw the truth now. The management of my life wasn't just about money and lawyers. It was built on this raw, terrifying power. Jian Wu walked toward us. He reached out a hand, and for the first time, I flinched. I was afraid of him, not just because of his enemies, but because of the darkness he carried inside him. "It's okay, GRM," he said. His voice was soft again, but it didn't trick me this time. I saw the blood on his cuff. "They won't bother you again. No one will ever bother you again." "You killed them?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "I removed a threat," he replied. He reached out and gently patted Leo's back, his touch light and fatherly. It was a terrifying contrast to the violence I had just witnessed. "Go inside. The maids will have fresh juice for Leo. I have to clean up this mess." I didn't wait. I ran for the house, my heels clicking frantically on the marble stairs. As I reached the safety of the sunroom, I looked back through the glass. Jian Wu was standing by the van, talking to his men. He looked like a king surveying a battlefield. I realized then that the walls of the estate weren't just there to keep me in. They were there to keep the rest of the world out, because the world Jian Wu lived in was a place of blood and shadows. He had shown me his mercy by saving us, but he had also shown me his true face. I wasn't just living with a rich man who was obsessed with me. I was living with a monster who would destroy anything and anyone to keep his grip on us. As the maids closed the heavy curtains, I sat on the floor with Leo, realizing that there was no such thing as safety in this house. There was only Jian Wu. The morning after the attack, the house was unnaturally quiet. The ruined roses had been replaced with fresh ones as if the violence had never happened. I sat in the library, staring at the wall, until the door opened. Jian Wu walked in. He looked refreshed, wearing a crisp white shirt that showed no sign of the blood I had seen on his sleeves the day before. He carried 2 folders in his hand and set them down on the desk in front of me. "Sit down, GRM," he said. His voice was calm, but it had that same edge of steel I was starting to recognize. "We need to finalize our future. I've given you time to adjust, but Leo needs stability. He needs a name." I sat across from him, my hands hidden in the folds of my dress, so he couldn't see them shaking. I looked at the 2 folders. One was blue, and the other was red. Jian Wu opened the blue folder first. "This," he said, sliding a document toward me, "is a marriage certificate. It has already been filed with the city. It only needs your signature to be official. If you sign this, you become a bae. You'll have access to everything I own. You will be the mother of the heir, and no one will ever dare to look at you with anything but respect." I looked at the lines for our names. It looked like a dream, the kind of life I used to think about when I was tired and hungry at the diner. But I knew it wasn't a gift. It was a contract. "And the other one?" I asked, nodding toward the red folder. Jian Wu's expression didn't change, but his eyes grew darker. He opened the red folder. Inside were hundreds of pages of legal documents. I saw the words custody petition and fitness evaluation printed in bold letters. "This is the alternative," he said. "If you refuse to marry me, I will file this immediately. My lawyers have already prepared the case. It details your history of running, your lack of a stable home, and the fact that you took a child into hiding without a father's consent. I have judges on my payroll, GRM. I have social workers who will say whatever I tell them to say." He leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the desk. "If we go to court, I will win. I will take Leo, and you will be barred from seeing him. You will be tied up in legal battles for the next 20 years, and by the time you're allowed to talk to him again, he won't even remember your face." The air felt like it was being sucked out of the room. I looked at the blue paper, then the red. You're giving me a choice between being your prisoner as a wife or losing my son forever. I am giving you the choice to be part of this family, Jianwu corrected. He picked up an expensive fountain pen and held it out to me. But let's be honest, GRM. There is no version of this story where you walk out of those gates with Leo. You can stay here as the queen of this house, with every luxury at your fingertips, or you can stay in a jail cell while I raise our son alone. You said you loved me once, I whispered, looking up at him. Is this how you treat people you love? Jianwu reached out and tilted my chin up, so I had to look into his eyes. I love what belongs to me, and I protect what is mine. You wanted a man who could provide, didn't you? This is what total provision looks like. It means you never have to worry about a bill, a threat, or a lonely night ever again. All it costs is your signature. I looked past him toward the window. I could see Leo in the distance, playing with a ball near the fountain. He looked so small against the backdrop of the massive stone walls. If I signed the blue paper, I would be staying in a beautiful cage, married to a man who used fear as a love language. If I didn't sign it, my son would grow up in this house without the only person who truly cared about his soul. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was a trap that had been set the moment he walked into my diner. If I sign, I said, my voice barely audible, do I get to keep him? Do I get to stay with him every day? Every single day, Jianwu promised. He pressed the pen into my hand. His fingers were warm, but his grip was firm. You will be the most protected woman in the country. No one will ever touch you. No one will ever take anything from you again. I took the pen. The weight of it felt like a mountain. I looked at the marriage certificate. By signing this, I was giving up my name, my freedom, and the woman who had fought so hard to be independent. But as I thought about Leo's laugh and the way he held my hand when he was scared, I knew I couldn't leave him. I signed the paper. Jianwu took the document and blew on the ink to dry it. He looked satisfied, like he had just won a war. He didn't hug me or tell me he was happy. He simply closed the blue folder and tucked it away. Welcome to the family, Mrs. Bay, he said. He stood up and walked to the door, calling for the maids. Tell the staff. We are celebrating tonight. My wife has finally come home. As he walked out, I stayed in the chair, the fountain pen still clutched in my hand. I had saved my son, but as I looked at the locked red folder on the desk, I realized I had officially become part of Jianwu's collection. The waitress was gone. The runner was dead. I was exactly where he wanted me, and the gates of the estate felt more permanent than they ever had before. The days that followed the signing of the papers were quiet and heavy. My new life didn't feel like a life at all. It felt like a performance. Every morning, the maids would dress me in expensive fabrics that felt like soft armor. Every meal was served on silver plates by people who wouldn't look me in the eye. I had everything a person could ever ask for, but I had never felt more empty. I stood by the tall glass windows of the upstairs gallery, looking down at the massive gardens below. The sun was shining, making the white stone paths glow. Leo was down there, running across the grass. He wasn't the tired, hungry little boy who used to wait for me in a cramped booth at the diner. He looked different now. He was wearing a tiny, perfectly tailored polo shirt and brand new shoes that didn't have a single scuff on them. He was playing with the remote control car that probably cost more than a month of my old rent. Jianwu was standing nearby, watching him. He wasn't holding a phone or a folder. He was just being a father. When the car flipped over, Jianwu knelt in the dirt that shouldn't touch a suit like his, and fixed it. Leo let out a high, bright laugh that traveled all the way up to my window. My heart twisted. This was the cruelty of Jianwu's trap. He had given Leo a paradise. In this garden, Leo didn't have to worry about the heat turning off. He didn't have to watch me cry over a pile of bills. He had a father who was a hero in his eyes, a man who could fix any toy and grant any wish. Leo was happier than I had ever seen him. He loved the castle. He loved the space. He loved the feeling of being important. But the price of his happiness was my soul. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I looked like a stranger. The woman in the window wore diamond earrings and had perfectly styled hair, but her eyes were full of shadows. To keep Leo in this paradise, I had to stay in the cage. I had to smile at Jianwu's guests. I had to sit at the head of a table in a house that felt like a museum. I had to be the wife of a man who had destroyed my freedom to prove his love. A soft knock came at the door. It was the head maid. Mrs. Bay, the jeweler has arrived for your fitting. Mr. Bay wants you to choose a necklace for the gala. I'll be there in a moment, I said, my voice sounding flat. I looked back down at the garden. Jianwu looked up then, as if he could feel my eyes on him. He didn't wave, but he held my gaze for a long time. He knew what I was thinking. He knew that every time I saw Leo smile at a new toy, I was reminded that I could never leave. He had used my own love for my son to lock the door and throw away the key. I realized then that Jianwu's greatest weapon wasn't his men or his money. It was the fact that he had made himself the provider of everything Leo needed. If I tried to take Leo away now, I wouldn't just be taking him back to a life of struggle. I would be taking him away from the only place he felt like a prince. I would be the villain in his story. I stepped away from the window and followed the maid down the hall. My heels made a hollow sound on the marble floor. Every step felt like I was walking deeper into a beautiful, golden fog. I saw the guards standing at the exits, their faces unreadable. They didn't need to hold me back. The sight of Leo's happy face in the garden was a stronger chain than any pair of handcuffs. I walked into the sitting room, where a velvet case full of sparkling emeralds waited for me. Jianwu walked in a moment later, still smelling like the fresh air from the garden. He came up behind me and placed his hands on my shoulders. His grip was steady and warm. He's having a wonderful time, isn't he? Jianwu whispered, looking at our reflections in the mirror. He is, I replied, my voice barely a whisper. Then it's worth it, Jianwu said. He picked up a heavy necklace and fastened it around my neck. The cold metal felt like a collar against my skin. Everything we do is for him, GRM. Remember that. He kissed the top of my head and walked away, leaving me staring at the sparkling jewels. I had wanted a better life for my son. I had signed up for a man who could provide. Now I had both, but as I looked at the high stone walls through the window, I knew that the real life I had dreamed of was gone forever. I was the queen of a kingdom I couldn't escape, living in a gilded cage built from the pieces of my own broken dreams. The sun began to dip behind the high stone walls, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and bruised orange. From the wide stone terrace, the world looked peaceful, but I knew better. I looked at the black sedans parked in a perfect row near the gates, and the men standing guard like silent ghosts. This was my world now. There were no more shifts at the diner. There were no more bus rides or counting pennies for milk. There was only this heavy, quiet luxury. Leo was still down on the lawn, exhausted from his day of play. He was sitting on the grass, leaning his head against the knee of one of the guards who was showing him how to fold a paper airplane. Seeing my son so relaxed around men who carried weapons made a knot tighten in my stomach. He wasn't afraid of the shadows anymore. To him, the shadows were his friends, his protectors. He was becoming one of them. I felt a familiar presence behind me. Jianwu stepped onto the terrace, his footsteps silent on the stone. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood beside me, looking out at the empire he had built. He looked like a man who had finally gathered all his treasures into one room. He reached out and slid his arm around my waist, pulling me firmly against his side. It wasn't a gentle hug, it was a claim. I didn't pull away. I had learned that pulling away only made his grip tighter. I leaned into him because my legs felt too heavy to hold me up on my own. Look at him, Jianwu whispered, his voice vibrating against my temple. He fits here, GRM. He was never meant for that tiny apartment or those dusty streets. He was born to rule just like I was. He's just a little boy, Jianwu, I said, my voice sounding tired and thin. He just wants to play. He is a bay, Jianwu corrected softly. And soon, the world will know it. Tomorrow, I am announcing our marriage to the board. Your face will be on every news station. Every person who works for me, and every person who fears me, will know that you are the woman standing at my right hand. I looked down at the diamond ring on my finger. It felt heavier than the iron gates at the end of the driveway. I wasn't just Jean Jiaram, the waitress who worked hard to keep her son safe. I was the wife of the most dangerous man in the country. I was a symbol of his power. By keeping me here, he was showing everyone that he could find anything that was lost and keep anything he wanted. Jian Wu turned me to face him. He took my chin in his hand, forcing me to look up at him. His eyes were dark and full of a strange, terrifying heat. "I told you in that diner, Jiaram," he said, his breath warm against my lips. "I told you I wasn't letting you leave again. I meant it. You are the heart of this house. Without you, the boy is just a legacy. With you, he is a family. I will burn every city you try to hide in. I will buy every person you try to speak to. You are mine, and you will stay mine until the end." I looked into his eyes and finally stopped looking for a way out. I saw the truth. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I wasn't even just a wife. I was the hostage queen of a kingdom built on secrets and blood. I would live in the finest rooms, wear the most beautiful jewels, and eat the best food, but I would never hold the key to my own front door. "I know," I whispered. Jian Wu smiled. It was the satisfied smile of a man who had won the final round of a long game. He kissed my forehead and kept his arm wrapped tightly around me as we watched the guards lead Leo back toward the house. The boy looked up and waved at us, his face full of pure, innocent joy. He didn't see the cage. He only saw the castle. As the heavy glass doors slid shut behind us, cutting off the sounds of the outside world, I realized that my long run was over. The waitress was gone, buried under layers of silk and gold. I was the queen of the underworld now, and as Jian Wu led me down the long, dark hallway toward our dinner, I knew the gates would never open for me again. I had traded my freedom for my son's smile, and in this house, that was the only deal that mattered.